Yeah, I know, man. I know. It's cringe to make fun of you. So automatically you win every argument by saying lol cringe. I know. You got it. It's certainly cringe to make fun of you for saying things like Seattle and Portland are literally on fire, bro. What the fuck are you talking about?
The Trump administration.
Listen, bro, look, you're probably like 12, 13, 14, you know, you'll grow out of it. I believe in you. Okay? I promise. If you're older than that, then that's kind of sad. If you're older than the age of 20 and you have like a meme XQC account, and you're typing stuff like that in the chat, like then it's wow, it's really sad. But I think for the time being, like you'll grow out of it.
Over the past 4 years, it's continually downplayed the threat of domestic terrorism. Did you ever have conversations with him when you were his national security advisor about the threat, very specifically, of white nationalism, domestic terrorism from his own supporters?
Sure. Well, we covered the ground in a number of National Security Council meetings. And it was something that the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the other law enforcement agencies were monitoring constantly.
Because there have been, obviously, former members of the Department of Homeland Security.
Also, this is a good reminder, but it is top of the hour every hour where we run a 6-second ad break. Hopefully I got through the stun lock. I remembered. We're going to continue with this video, but I'm going to go pee real quick and run this ad. Here it is.
Security have come on the record now to say that you downplayed that threat, that particularly around the time you were publishing the National Strategy for Counterterrorism in October 2018, there were obviously only 2 very small references to domestic terrorism in that document. What do you make of that?
Your question is fundamentally wrong. I didn't write it and promulgate it. You have quoted some subordinates.
So he's lying?
Who runs the government? The Munchkins or the cabinet secretaries?
I guess what I'm alluding to broadly is a perception and an understanding across vast swathes of the country that the Trump administration significantly downplayed the threat of domestic terrorism.
Well, you're flatly wrong on that. You're flatly wrong, and I think overstating the threat. I've condemned the attack on the Capitol, but to exaggerate it and to make it into something more than it is equally a mistake.
So you still believe that America is more prone to a threat from international terrorism than it is from insider terrorism?
I think anybody who went through 9/11 would believe that.
Officials had been warning for weeks that members of the public should stay away from Biden's inauguration. But on the morning he took the oath of office, I went out to the only public viewing area a mile from the Capitol, where a small crowd of people from all over the country had gathered.
Probably won't see much once you get in there, so.
What about the parade?
The parade won't be going by here.
There was nothing to see, but just being here still meant something.
What do you make of the restrictions in place here? They're letting 25 people in to go and see this peaceful transfer of power.
Lies, greed, and hate created the environment that makes the security necessary.
Yeah.
It's horribly unfair.
Well, yeah, it is frustrating, but at the same time, I understand the importance of the security. And so, I mean, all you can do is be here and support. So that's why I'm here.
I booked this flight months ago. I was going to cancel it. And I don't know, I just thought it was important to come. It's like, if, you know, we can't come and celebrate. Like, that's letting the other side win.
Where did you guys come from today?
Texas.
You came from Texas?
Yes.
Why did you guys decide to make the journey?
Just to celebrate the fact that the first lady, first female
Vice
president, yes, and African American, Asian American.
Privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden Jr.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, Democracy has prevailed. Sustained by faith, driven by conviction, devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Yes! 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 Yes!
The streets may be deserted and parts of the country locked down, but this is still the beginning of a new political era, one that will have to overcome the many traumas of the past 4 years.
Sacha Baron Cohen on Borat sequel playing activist Abby Hoffman in Chicago 7. Where is this from? What the fuck? Why? Dude, his social media guy will literally not stop DMing me. Like, I got excited thinking it was actually him that was DMing me, and since then, he literally nonstop is like, you can stop. It's very obvious that he's sending me, like, automated messages to whoever the fuck, like, follows Sacha Baron Cohen. But it is so sad because I had, like, such a profoundly excited moment when I thought, like, oh my God, is Sacha Baron Cohen DMing me? And then found out that it was his, like, social media guy. And now he literally does not stop DMing me. He sends me more messages than fucking the Trump campaign does. It's so sad. Chicago 7 was good, yeah.
Actor, writer, and producer
I did watch
Sacha Baron Cohen is in two of the most critically acclaimed movies of the past year. He surprised the world with the release.
It's like a feeling of thinking that you finally got a match on Tinder, but it's a bot, said somebody in the chat. And yes, that is exactly like that.
Of a Borat sequel before the election and had a starring role in Aaron Sorkin's The Trial of the Chicago 7. Both are considered Oscar contenders. In an exclusive interview with him, we spoke with Sacha Baron Cohen about why he was so driven to make both of these films.
Do you have contempt for your government?
I'll tell you, Mr. Schultz, it's nothing compared to the contempt my government has for me.
Sacha Baron Cohen chased the role of Abby Hoffman in The Trial of the Chicago 7 for 13 years.
Give me a moment, would you, friend? I've never been on trial for my thoughts before.
I just found him this incredibly funny, charismatic character who underneath it all was amazingly courageous and was ready to give his life to fight injustice. So I needed to play him.
Are they about to conquer Spain?
Hoffman was one of the real-life Chicago 7, political activists who were put on trial for their anti-Vietnam War demonstrations at the 1968 Democratic National Convention. In many ways, he's very similar to you.
I mean, that's a great compliment. I would say he's really inspiring. I mean, he realized the power of humor in being able to challenge certain things that he found immoral in society. He's always saying, we need to go where the cameras are.
It's revolution time. We may have to hurt somebody's feelings.
Baron Cohen has earned a reputation as revolutionary himself. Through the outrageous behavior of his own characters, he gets people to reveal their inner prejudices, most notably as the infamous journalist from Kazakhstan, Borat.
Ali in an island, Ali in a northern island.
They take them and they take them to.
Not gonna lie, his accent in Chicago 7 kind of sucked. Yeah, I know. He's just like, it's so hard for him. He's such a thick, like, it's like a mishmash of like Israeli / British accent that he has, that it's like virtually impossible for him not to fucking sound like have a tinge of that no matter what happens.
Jail and finish
Take them out and hang them.
Yes.
That's what we're trying to get done here.
High five.
That performance won him a Golden Globe in 2007.
Thank you to every American who has not sued me so far. Thank you.
As a kid growing up in Northwest London, Baron Cohen fell in love with comedy
Actually, me and my brother, we used to improvise songs, and there was an old South African 95-year-old pianist who used to come around to my parents' house, and she would say, you know, one day you will be in Hollywood. They'll love you then. We're like, yes, yeah, that's right, Granny. Sure we will, of course we will. It seemed so ludicrous.
Despite his success, the 49-year-old comedian has been reluctant to give interviews as himself.
Probably some of that is insecurity, but a lot of that is I just didn't want to be recognized. I didn't see the upside of becoming famous as myself.
But in a 2019 speech to the Anti-Defamation League, he spoke out publicly for the first time against social media companies.
All this hate and violence is being facilitated by a handful of internet companies that amount to the greatest propaganda machine in history.
Baron Cohen thought he'd retired his iconic Borat character, but decided he had to bring him back ahead of the 2020 election.
Why don't they talk about Who is America? Like, I think Who is America was even better as far as like exposing some of the corruption. Exposing some of the corruption within like American politics. It's criminally underrated.
Election. In Borat's subsequent movie film, the Kazakh reporter crashes an actual conservative conference, dressed in a fat suit and prosthetics as President Trump, trying to get to Vice President Mike Pence.
Michael Pence, I brought the girl for you.
Putting the actor's own safety on the line
Michael
for
Pence.
the sake of satire.
This wasn't a prank movie. This was my form of peaceful protest.
In those moments, you risk arrest or sometimes something even more dangerous.
So this was the first movie where I'd been advised to wear a bulletproof vest during a couple of scenes. One of them was at a gun rally in Washington State where I was singing a song called the Wuhan Flu.
This shit is crazy. The way that they extracted him out of that is like actually nuts though.
Obama, what we gonna do? Inject him with the Wuhan flu.
In the end there, you actually got chased off the stage.
Yes, a group of armed members of the crowd stormed the stage, overpowered the security, and one of them actually reached for his pistol. And I was extremely lucky that I had a fantastic bodyguard who grabbed the guy's arm and told him, whispered the words, the phrase, "It's not worth it, buddy."
Was there any point during it where you said to yourself, why am I doing this?
Throughout the whole movie. I remember being in the bathroom before that gun rally, and I was putting on a bulletproof vest and looking at myself in the mirror, just thinking, I must be completely mad. What are you doing?
At one point,
Could I stay in your home?
he spent 5 days in COVID lockdown
It's not
with
worth
two
it, buddy.
conspiracy theorists. It's the longest he's ever had to remain in character.
I think I had close to having a panic attack because there were no crew around. I thought, how do I do this? How am I not going to slip up for, you know, having breakfast, lunch, dinner, getting drunk with them in the evenings?
It was worth it because those guys were just, I mean, they were pivotal to the film.
Jim and Jerry, which was their names, were...
Wait, I thought those were actors. What the fuck? He actually literally lived with those people with cameras in there and shit? I literally thought that was scripted. There's no way that was real. What the fuck? There's no way. He said there was no crew? How the fuck did a cameraman film it then? I know that they knew that he was filming.
Good guys, you know, they were kind to a foreigner. They were actually, to a degree, they were feminists. But they believed in some reprehensible conspiracy theories, and it wasn't really their fault. They'd been fed a diet of these lies and conspiracy theories on social media and by various news channels.
Feminists?
We're living in a dangerous age where the difference between fact and fiction is not evident anymore.
But Sacha Baron Cohen, who's married to actress Isla Fisher and now a father of 3, says it's time to really put Borat behind him. Was this your last undercover movie, or would you do it again?
No, I can't do it again. I was lucky to make it out of this one fully intact, so no.
I asked him, I said, do you alert your wife when you're going into these dangerous situations? And he said, no, I don't. I did that once when he was making Bruno, and he ended up being chased by the police that day, and he said she's never gone back to a shoot
sure
after
he
that.
doesn't want his wife to worry about him, but the beauty of what he does, because I actually think he's brilliant on how what he puts on the screen, is that on one level you are saying, wow, this is amazing, and on the other you're cringing.
You're squirming.
You're cringing, and then the next minute you're doubled over in laughter.
Yeah. I mean, you're on a roller coaster the whole time.
But he's always making a point.
Yes.
He got a lot of attention when he spoke out about social media back in 2019, where people thought, let me take a look at this. Yeah. He made some really very powerful
points. And I mentioned he went after that Abby Hoffman part. Way back in 2007, he actually called Steven Spielberg on the phone and said, I want this part. And he said, well, it's got a very distinct accent you don't have. And he said, I'll give you 2 weeks to learn it. And
his criticism...
And what happened?
It waited 13 years for them to actually make the film. He interrupted Borat, the filming of it, to go do the Chicago 7 movie. He wanted it so bad.
Good thing that he took 13 years to learn the accent. And definitely still didn't.
Badly. Yeah.
His criticism of social media may be his more lasting legacy, however, and it has not ended with that speech.
That's right.
On Election Day, with Donald Trump leaving the Oval Office, he had a picture of Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg, and he said, 1 down, 1 to go. He really thinks that social media...
Yeah, this is what his fucking social media manager DMs me about every day. All right, I'm skipping this part. The minimum wage debate explained. Finally, we're going to get to the second thought video, and then there's some lighter reacts coming in. Folks! Let's do it. Friend of
This
the show
episode and others like it are made possible.
Friend of the show, Second Thought, made a video on the minimum wage
by the
debate.
generous
Let's
support
take a
of my
look.
patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help me make more content like this and get early access to every new video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. Every few years and pretty much constantly over the last half decade or so, the U.S. enters a cataclysmic debate over the federal minimum wage. Some people think...
Oh my God, I love that he immediately started with Stossel, dude. John Stossel is so bad, it's great.
Raising the wage would destroy businesses and raise prices for goods and services. Others think it's essential to keep up with inflation and rising housing prices. Both sides firmly believe that their position is the one supported by hard data and evidence. But there are certain realities surrounding this debate that are never addressed. So in this episode, I'm going to address them. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be more informed on the minimum wage debate, but more than that, you'll have a new understanding of why it's such a divisive issue in the first place. Let's start with some basic history. Once upon a time, there were no regulations regarding how much bosses had to pay their workers. This was back in the early 1900s, and because of this wild west of a labor market, those who owned the factories could pay their workers as little as they wanted. And if those workers didn't...
The good old days, boys! You know? Free market enterprise! Where enterprising individuals with a tidy sum of intergenerational wealth could just start a business and work their workers to the bone. Work faster, you plebes.
Like it, they could quit, and other starving Americans would gladly take their place. This worked out wonderfully for the owner class. They knew that a desperate working population would have little choice but to accept the tiny wages they offered, because the alternative was abject poverty and starvation.
Which is, of course, very different than today, as you know.
Over the years, labor laws were established to help prevent this predatory behavior, and in 1938, the Fair Labor...
Bring back child labor, I say!
Labor laws were established to help prevent this predatory behavior, and in 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act established the country's first minimum wage, a system that had already been implemented in other developed nations. This legislation also banned the use of exploitative child labor, which had been an incredibly lucrative...
I don't understand why we can't use child labor anymore. I mean, these are very important tools and skills that these kids are learning. It's all right. You got to get them used to it. You got to get these children used to the black lung early on.
Lucrative practice for early 20th century business owners. The owner class was not happy about this, but millions of parents across the country were relieved that they would receive better wages and that their children would no longer be torn to pieces by the massive, dangerous machines the business owners forced them to crawl into to fix. Almost 30 years later, in 1960,
I can't stress this enough. Republicans of today are literally the same kinds of conservatives that unironically defended child labor back then. It is unimaginable to think. You think like, what? No, that's not true. No, literally, it's the same operating principle. Conservatives back then defended child labor, wanted child labor to continue, and just like they still defend, free market enterprise and no fucking no economic equality initiatives, no fucking economic justice whatsoever. It's the same guiding principle, the principle of conservatism.
An amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act raised the federal minimum wage to $1.60 per hour and extended coverage to federal employees and some farm workers for the first time. This particular amendment is a critical bit of historical evidence because, as we'll see later, a recent study made some important findings regarding the minimum wage and employment. Now, let's take a look at how the minimum wage has changed over time.
I thought you said only black kids were forced to do child labor and suffered losing limbs, but that guy showed only white children. Says, young turds. Okay, I'm banning very obvious bait accounts that you create specifically to just like say one really stupid thing and derail the conversation instead of addressing it. So either try harder, get a better account. If you make a sock account, don't immediately follow me on the same day that you made your sock account, because I'm just going to ban you and move on.
6 decades ago, in 1960, the minimum wage was $1 per hour. Over the following 60 years, the wage steadily rose, today sitting at $7.25. Taken by itself, this graph looks pretty good. The line goes up. Here's the problem. Just listing dollar amounts without historical context does not give an accurate depiction of what those amounts mean. Let's look at the same line adjusted for inflation. That's a lot less impressive. These peaks and troughs represent each time the minimum wage has been raised, and inflation wiping out those gains. Taken as a whole, we can see that compensation for minimum wage workers is actually significantly lower today than it was 60 years ago. This peak here, representing the 1966 amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act, marked the high point of the US federal minimum wage. $1.60 an hour in 1966, adjusted for inflation, equates to almost $13 an hour today, nearly twice our current minimum wage. Okay, so we know that real compensation for workers is lower than it was in the past. But this is where we get to the crux of the matter. Many people don't care that it's lower because they believe that a minimum wage should not be a living wage, that you should not be able to support yourself on this wage because jobs that pay that little are meant to be beginner jobs.
So minimum wage should be $12.75? No. Because when adjusted to, I think, $7.50, since then and how much inflation has increased, it gets even higher. Remember, that's without any wage increases. That's without any minimum wage increases. You understand? Like when it originally came out.
Or things to keep retirees occupied. Let's talk about that. Do students and other young
$100 an hour minimum wage Keck W? Again, incredible argument, dude.
Smarter.
Incredible argument. Incredible argument.
People make up the bulk of minimum wage workers? Yes. Are they typically able to rely on their parents for housing? Yes. Does this mean that they don't need more money in order to simply survive? In many cases, yes. Does that mean we should allow their compensation to slip so far behind the rate of inflation that their pay has next to no value? No. Justifying poverty wages simply because many minimum wage workers are students is not a valid reason to keep paying so little. And the minimum wage is a poverty wage. According to several studies, there's not a single county in the entire nation where a minimum wage earner could afford a one-bedroom apartment. If the minimum wage had simply kept up with inflation and productivity gains since 1968, it would be over $24 per hour today. That's a lot of surplus labor value that's been taken from workers and given to their bosses. Unsurprisingly, the owner class is almost uniformly opposed to raising the minimum wage at all.
By the way, minimum wage increases by age. If you look at workers, this is from back in 2012, but it was 20% back in 2012. 20% of the workers were 16 to 19 years old. And the 80% of workers at that point were over the age of 20 that were relying on minimum wage. That number is, I think, increased a lot more too. You couldn't live in half the country for one $15 an hour 40-hour job either. What happens when companies lay people off in favor of outsourcing to places like China? What do you mean, dude? That's already fucking happened. What are you talking about, dude? What are you even fucking talking about? That literally already happened, brother. This is just the people that are, you know, in industries that work here in the service industry. You understand? Like, what are you going to do? Outsource the fucking person who delivers your chicken tendies to China? What's he going to do? Deliver it from China, dude? That fight is already gone. That literally already happened. This is about the aftermath of that. And the people who say, what about automation? What about automation? Fail to recognize that, again, every instance, every dollar of profit currently already is literally being spent to automate parts of the labor force to begin with. Okay? Automation is an unstoppable force. Automation is not a bad thing. The reason why we think automation is bad is because of the way that profit gets distributed, or profits and how profits generate and how those profits are distributed in our current economic organization of society. Okay? Automation is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Automation opens up new jobs, though. Dummy, read the book, Future Proof. Yeah, that's another example as well. Do the Dems have the power to actually raise the national minimum wage to 15 or just federally? Is that something up to states? See, he's learning. Small PPXQC is learning. The Democrats have the power to actually raise the national minimum wage at the federal level in federal jurisdiction to $15 minimum wage. Actually, it happened literally earlier today when Joseph Robinette Biden signed an executive order. But beyond that, what the Democrats have to do is at least pass a bill. There are numerous ways of passing that legislation. Some requires Republican compromise as well, which could be found, and others do not. How is automation going to afford recreational substances without an established minimum wage? What? Easy to say when you don't work in a role where they could automate it and just lay off most of the workforce that is impacted. Okay. I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. There is no stopping automation. Why the fuck would you want to continue doing why would you keep doing menial labor? Okay? If robots can take over that part of your job. In a normal society, you should be able to have that freedom. Automation is something you should fucking welcome, get excited for, so that you no longer have to fucking clean toilets, or you no longer have to sit on an assembly line. But because of the way that our society operates, we literally are terrified of that.
Capital overtaking human capital from a cost-effective sense is the single most dangerous potential to our economy. Capitalism converges to a peak of a few and capital only exacerbates that process. I like your cut, G.
Not everyone sits on their ass preaching liberties and ideals while raking in 20+ K a month. Shut the fuck up, dude. You're so ignorant on the topic. You're right, brother. You're right. We should actually reject technological achievements. You're right. We should go back to the original assembly line as well. You're right. Or maybe I recognize that it is virtually impossible to continue automating without changing certain structures within society. Without changing the way that wealth gets distributed in society. It's just impossible. Because ultimately, if everyone is fucking fired because production is nearly fully automated, okay, with artificial intelligence and with computers and robots and shit, and no one has a job, who's gonna buy the fucking shitty milkshakes? Who's gonna buy the fucking t-shirts?
Love you,
If you don't have any money, you're not gonna do that. The reason why you're terrified of automation when you shouldn't be is because of the way that our economy is organized. Yelling at me
benefits capital owners, not workers.
Yelling at me is maybe making you feel a little bit better right now, but that's not necessarily the problem. The problem isn't fucking robots, brother. The problem is those who will not give you a percentage of the profits that you generated for them and quickly fucking get rid of you and put a robot in your place because it's cheaper to fucking use that robot. Wow, it's almost like consumerism is an issue. Do you hear yourself sometimes? You're contributing to the downfalls of the planet as we know it. Dude, shut the fuck up. You're on Twitch. Shut up. Like, you're just as much a consumer as every single one of us, okay? Either get the fuck off Twitch and go live in the goddamn woods or shut the fuck up. What do you mean consumerism? This entire economy is built around, like, the American labor force, or the American people as a whole have a very important function, and that is consuming, okay?
Wait, I'm into that. Yes,
it's more important than anything else. The moment we stop consuming, the moment the global economy falls apart.
Just become a robot forehead.
If automation is inevitable, then why should we raise the minimum wage? Then we're just going to have to pay the robots more. What?
My small business cannot be sustained without child labor. Have you thought about that, Arjan?
It's like that, but you participate in society meme, such a bad argument. Really? Consumption? Necessary for survival? Or consumption that even could be hedonistic in nature, but at least gives you some bit of fucking pleasure? Shitting on that is literally idiotic. Okay? It is. It's fucking idiotic. Especially from the point of view of alienation, and especially from the point of view of how the rate of profit and its tendency to fall occurs under a capitalist organization of the economy. It's a fundamental Marxist truth that I'm describing to you. Oh, that person was agreeing with me. Never mind. That guy was just criticizing consumerism and you shit on him just... No, he wasn't. Yeah, just because he's participating in society doesn't mean he can't criticize you. Like, socialism equals no iPhone people. No, he was a brain dead person. Shut the fuck up, Chad. No, I got it correctly. No, I got it correctly. He was a brain dead fucking moron who thinks that what I'm referencing here is like, we need rampant consumerism. No. What I mean when I say, if there are no jobs, then there's no one to fucking buy stuff with no purchasing power, then the economy fucking falls apart, is exactly is a fundamental Marxist theory, okay? I was right about the first guy, and I was right about the second guy, too.
Oh my god, Robot Hassan is here. Beep beep boop, here is my opinion on this Dan Crenshaw Joe Rogan clip.
Is it 2,000 to help the people or to help people buy stuff? Helping people buy stuff is helping people. You should be afraid of automation. You should instead still be afraid of the corporate overlords who own the automation under different economic conditions. Maybe you have to part ownership of said automation and cut of the work and pay down for it.
Hassan,
The same reason why people are afraid of automation is the same. The reason why people are afraid of automation is because through automation, computation, for example, our productivity has increased dramatically in the past couple decades, and yet wages have remained stagnant. And the reason for that is because profit does not get distributed evenly, because people do not get paid for the value that they bring to a company. They get paid by however low your bosses can pay you. That is what you will get paid, not necessarily what kind of value you bring to a corporation. Okay? Anyway. Let's keep going with the video. I got unlocked hella hard here.
But what's more disappointing is seeing people who make $16 per hour fighting with people who make $7.25 an hour when their bosses make thousands of dollars per hour. There's a certain mindset in America where people believe if I just scrimp and save enough, if I work enough overtime, if I do what I'm told, if I just work hard enough, one day I'll be the one making thousands of dollars per hour. Of course, the owner class is thrilled by this. When the working class is divided, those—
You sound jealous of minimum wage workers? We don't really need jobs with all the... Marx wasn't Walt Disney? Yes. And the difference is he wasn't a fucking raging anti-Semite, even though people try to claim he was. So you're right, he wasn't. We don't need all the jobs with the robots.
Those who make twice the minimum wage fighting against lower wage workers earning even a single dollar more, it makes the capitalist job that much easier. Remember, the people making $16 an hour are still making less than what the minimum wage should be if it had just kept up with inflation and productivity. But let's set this aside for now and address some of the common objections to raising the minimum wage. We'll begin with the objection that raising the minimum wage will increase housing prices. I would start by asking those people, when was the last time you rented an apartment? I imagine it was quite a while ago. It's understandable then that these people are a little out of touch with the realities of housing prices in the rental market. The federal minimum wage has not been raised since 2009. Between 2010 and 2020, the average apartment rental price has increased by 40%, and by much more than that in some areas. Let me repeat that. The price for housing has increased by 40%, while the minimum wage has increased by 0%. So
that's so weird, dude. Huh.
To the people saying raising the minimum wage will increase housing prices, that has already been happening without raising the pay to a living wage. The minimum wage has nothing to do with rising prices in housing or in any other area. When people say your Big Mac will cost $30 if the wage goes up, they're clearly not familiar with McDonald's pay in Denmark. If you work at a McDonald's in Denmark, your starting pay is $22 per hour. You also get 6 weeks of paid vacation, life insurance.
Disgusting communism, dude. Literally disgusting communism. I hear $22 an hour in Denmark, and I'm just... I anger myself. I'm foaming out of the mouth thinking about these disgusting commies in Denmark. How much does that burger cost? Tell us, second thought.
Year of paid maternity leave and a pension plan. Their Big Mac costs 27 cents more than in America. 27 cents is apparently the difference between respecting your workers and considering them stupid, morally deficient, low-skill workers. The argument that raising the minimum wage will increase prices on housing and goods has no basis in reality. Let's move on to probably the most—
There's no way I'm paying that, folks. I'm sorry. That's goddamn un-American. This is just like George Orwell, 1986. This is just like it. Paying 27 extra cents for a Big Mac? Oh! Or let me do it from the liberal point of view. Sweaty, actually, you're not taking into consideration poor people who need to have a healthy diet of 3 Big Macs per day. And that 27-cent increase is significantly going to harm their budgets, okay? Budget shortfalls are real, Sweaty. Why aren't you thinking about the poors? Meanwhile, it's like this person I'm talking about is like literally making fucking $200,000 a year to like make the same exact ad in New York over and over again.
Most common example. Raising the minimum wage will drive companies out of business. On the surface, this is a valid concern. Many small businesses do operate on razor-thin margins, and an increase in employee compensation could in theory make their business untenable. Let's return to that study I mentioned earlier. In September of 2020, a new report was published that examined the effects of the minimum wage increase as part of the 1966 Fair Labor Standards Act amendment. Their findings? Earnings rose sharply in all affected industries, the racial wealth gap was significantly diminished, and, most importantly for this discussion, there was no adverse effect on employment. Businesses could afford to pay their workers more, they just didn't want to. It's no stretch of the imagination to assume that the same is true today, especially when tax breaks for businesses and the wealthy have increased dramatically since the 80s, coincidentally, the period since which worker compensation has stagnated. So, based on historical precedent, there's no reason to assume that increasing the minimum wage would drive companies out of business, especially when some of the largest employers of minimum wage workers are hugely.
I just don't get why it doesn't raise the prices, though. Do execs just make less from Denmark? Can you explain? I'm trying hard to understand. Yes, it cuts into their fucking profit margin. They still profit, but just not as much as they do in the United States of America. That's literally what we are supposed to do. When people say, oh, dude, this is actually going to make shit more expensive, they're talking about how McDonald's will make the decision, the educated decision, to transfer the cost over to the fucking consumer. There is a pool of funds that you can transfer the cost onto, okay? And that pool of cost is your profit. That's maybe less of a marketing budget, maybe less of a fucking R&D budget overall, and certainly a smaller budget for the board executives, okay? But if execs can't make so much money, then it literally kills people. Yeah, exactly. R&D at McDonald's? Yes, of course, dude. They fucking spend millions of dollars on research and development at McDonald's. Are you insane? What, you think McDonald's doesn't do R&D? Are you fucking crazy?
Profitable megacorporations like Walmart and McDonald's. But let's return to the hypothetical that's so often used on pro-business news outlets. The mom and pop family business that simply can't afford to pay their workers anymore. Here's the thing. If you cannot afford to pay your workers a living wage, you should not be in business. This is how the free market is supposed to work, remember? Your
also true.
Business is at the mercy of the market. If you don't make enough...
When you say, oh, sorry, I can't pay my workers a living wage if there is an increase of the minimum wage, how is that argument any different than, sorry, I can't exist without having child laborers? Or, sorry, my business falls apart without literally enslaving people. Well, okay, then your business fucking sucks. It's unethical to begin with.
Enough money to cover your expenses, by free market logic, you should not be in business. Paying your workers is the most basic expense of all. Again, the minimum wage should be over $24 per hour. If you can't pay your workers a third of that rate, that means the only reason you're in business is because you're exploiting people by paying them poverty wages. This is the entire basis for the existence of the gig economy.
I don't think the rent price point is fair. Landlords will definitely raise price because there's no broad rent control in this country. The price of goods point makes sense. Dude, okay, but that's a separate problem that needs to be addressed with legislation or some sort of fucking restriction, some sort of regulation. You get that, right? We can't raise the minimum wage because it'll just immediately go to landlords is not a good fucking argument. You're talking about a separate problem as addressed by Second Thought even before he addressed the rent control thing, even before he addressed the price of rent increasing. Some marketplaces have seen a 40% increase in rent without with a 0% increase in fucking minimum wage. Why did that happen? That happened because it's a separate problem, completely unrelated to the increase in minimum wage.
So accustomed to devaluing workers that companies like Uber no longer even classify their workers as employees, so they can get away with paying them nothing at all. But let's give small business owners the benefit of the doubt here. I'm going to assume that you genuinely want to run an ethical business that pays its workers fairly. I can understand how it would be a challenge to raise your workers' pay from whatever you're paying them now to $15 per hour all in one chunk. Wouldn't it make more sense if instead of having to raise the minimum wage by large amounts every decade or so, we chose to raise the wage every year based on inflation and other metrics? This would make the change more gradual and manageable, the workers would be paid fairly, and it wouldn't put undue stress on you, the business owner. Other countries already do this. Instead of leaving the minimum wage in the hands of politicians, in countries like France and Australia, economic commissions reevaluate their minimum wage every year, raising it to match critical economic signifiers. It's no coincidence that countries that take this common sense approach also have a higher minimum wage relative to the average worker's salary. Unsurprisingly, the US ranks dead last by this metric. Okay, so let's assume you're on board with the idea that workers should at least be paid a living wage. That inevitably leads us to the next objection. If the minimum wage goes up, they might make more money than other low-paid workers, like teachers. I'm going to ask you to think about that statement for a moment. If minimum wage workers earn more money, say $15 per hour, still less than what the minimum wage should be, they might make more money than teachers. I would suggest that there's an easy solution here. It's
increase the fucking prices, increase the wages for teachers.
Not to demand that the minimum wage stays the same, it's to demand that all low-paid workers get a raise. This goes back to the strange American delusion that one day you'll be rich. No. If you're a teacher, a janitor, if you work a trade, if you're in retail, if you sell hours of your life for a wage, you're in the same boat as minimum wage earners. You both deserve to be paid more. In 2020, the federal government spent over $720 billion on the military, and that was just the base budget. When you account for other aspects of the so-called defense budget, you get numbers that are alarmingly close to $1 trillion. $1 trillion in a single year. More money than the next 10 nations combined spend on their militaries. There's not a country on Earth that could even come close.
Listen, buddy, that's to protect the world, okay? We need more of that. Otherwise, it's George Orwell, baby.
To threatening the US. And yet we spend all this money on submarines and aircraft carriers and billions of tons of bombs. We have the money to fully fund our schools, invest in new public projects, and improve the lives of all Americans. Our priority—
Yeah, but we're the richest country, so what we do is the best. Being the richest country is completely fucking meaningless if a significant chunk of your population doesn't even have fucking $400 in emergency spending, that are living paycheck to paycheck.
Are just out of alignment with what the country actually needs. Walmart made over $129 billion in profit last year. Supermarket chains saw an increase of over 39%.
The irony of the American wealth is that, like, even when it comes to, okay, the funniest thing about American wealth is that even our billionaires are wealthier than the rest of the world's billionaires, right? We have the wealthiest billionaires in the world, except we don't have the most billionaires per capita. Norway has more billionaires per capita than the United States. Sweden has more billionaires per capita than the United States. We're not even fucking spreading the wealth amongst the billionaires. Even our billionaires are like, nope, I'm going to have most of it. How fucking insane is that, by the way?
in their profits during the pandemic, while their workers, whom the companies labeled essential, saw little to no increase in pay, despite putting their lives on the line for their employers. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and a handful of their billionaire friends increased their net worth by $1 trillion over the same period. These people make more money in a single hour than the average person will earn in a lifetime, and we're squabbling over giving our lowest paid workers an extra $7 an hour? There is a sickness in—
My man said that's because they have less population. Brother, what do you think per capita means, dude? What the fuck? Yo! He said that's because they have a smaller population, dude. Oh no. I meant our billionaires are bigger per capita. They're hogs. They occupy more space.
in America that has been programmed into us over the last 4 decades. We are conditioned to be hyper-competitive, to see earning a living as survival of the fittest, to rely only on ourselves and see others' hardship as evidence of some moral failing. This pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality has seeped into our national consciousness and completely poisoned our outlook on labor. Like most discourse around money, the minimum wage debate—
Have you gone over the topic of CBO projecting 1 to 3 million jobs lost by 2025? The minimum wage is increased to $15. One, I haven't seen. We looked at it briefly yesterday. That same report also shows 2 to 3 million people will be lifted out of fucking poverty. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. So clearly, it's better overall. And secondly, again, minimum wage and its decrease to job loss has been, and I hate to do this like because conservatives do it all the fucking time, but according to studies that literally look at other fucking studies, most of the studies conducted on minimum wage decreases or minimum wage increases leading to job loss are heavily biased in the way they source it. Yes, a meta-analysis, a meta-study. I don't know if that's the job losses accounted for from like people losing their second jobs though. Everyone's immediate reaction is that, but what stops companies increasing prices to adjust to the according to minimum wage? Even if companies were to adjust prices in accordance to a raise in the minimum wage, what you have to remember is that cost is shared by billions of fucking people. And therefore, that price increase, as they have already shown in this video, is minuscule in comparison to the actual increase in wages that will lift people out of poverty.
Debate boils down to the fact that Americans are so conditioned to be entirely individualistic that they feel personally attacked when someone else's income inches even a cent closer to their own. It's hard to overcome this.
Also, this happens routinely where people advocate to increase minimum wage. Seattle's a perfect example of this, where there is immediately a litany of economists that come out of the woodwork and scream about how job loss is going to occur. Job loss is going to occur. And then a couple of years later, those economists are nowhere to be found because their prediction came out to be completely untrue.
This mindset. The propaganda of suicidal self-reliance and hyper-individualism makes it incredibly difficult to watch other people succeed. Because deep down, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, watching our fellow workers succeed makes it feel like we have failed. At its core, the minimum wage debate isn't just about the minimum wage. It represents a sort of proxy for all class consciousness in America. There's no easy answer here. The process of deprogramming an entire population will be a massive undertaking. But the first step must be a renewed understanding of class struggle. If you are a worker, whether you're in retail, food service, transportation, whether you're young or old, from New York or Alabama. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you sell hours of your life for a wage, you are working class. The owner class, the people who own the massive corporations, the restaurants, the car dealerships, the people who pay your wage and make million-dollar donations to corrupt politicians, they have a vested interest in paying you as little as possible, because that will maximize their profits. The struggle is not you versus your fellow workers, but all workers versus the obscenely wealthy owner class who refuse to allow America to become the country they claim it is. A country that works for all Americans, not just those at the very top. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that this kind
The source for billionaires per capita comes from, drumroll please, the motherfucking American Enterprise Institute, where a person in the American Enterprise Institute, which is literally a reactionary shithole think tank, was trying to make the argument that Bernie Sanders is fucking wrong, and Bernie Sanders supporters are fucking wrong, and that Norway is not the communist paradise that Bernie Sanders and his supporters think. So they actually ended up owning themselves by showing that there were more billionaires per capita in Sweden and Norway in the social democracy, because they are not fucking communist, obviously, or nor are they socialist, but the social democracies, which are still capitalist, in Norway and Sweden, there are more billionaires per capita than the United States. That is the absolute best own you can fucking make, because then you could say, well, look at that. Norway and Sweden, they haven't fucking executed their billionaires, and yet seemingly they're doing fine as far as their economy goes, and they're seemingly doing fine with a comfortable living wage that they can offer to nearly every single fucking individual. Why can't we be more like Norway in the short term? Stop saying Sweden doesn't have minimum wage if you don't know that union collective bargaining agreements encompass nearly the entirety of their fucking labor force, and a minimum wage would actually lower their negotiated wages. If you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, either shut the fuck up and learn a thing or two, or you're going to look like an asshole and I'm going to fucking dunk on you. In America, 11% of our labor force is unionized, okay? 11%. Collective bargaining agreements do not encompass nearly the same percentage of the labor force in the country as they do in countries like France, which have a comparably lower rate of unionization in the workforce, but still have nearly the majority, if not all, of the labor force protected under those same collective bargaining agreements. %11 of this country is unionized. That is 4% lower than the rate of unionization in a country like Chile, a country that our economists have fucking literally destroyed. A country that is seen as the neoliberal testing grounds has a higher percentage of unionization than our fucking country. How crazy is that? Thanks for the clarification of the source for billionaires per capita. That was funny. What is your stance on removing a minimum wage as a whole? Dude, did you literally just tune in? I answered your question. I literally just answered. No, you didn't just tune in. There's no way you just tuned in. I just answered why a country like Sweden has a higher fucking functional minimum wage than a country like the United States of America. The minimum wage, having no minimum wage in a country like Sweden, isn't the reason why their wages are so high overall. Okay, we're gonna go back to the Hogwatch stuff. But before we go to the conversation is so tiring. You get the same NPC show with 3 lines of dialogue. Okay, before we get to the Hogwatch again, before we go back, because I have the date.